Hello, everyone. It is 1 o'clock. That means we're going to start with the GROW session at IETF116 in Yokohama, Japan. If you're not supposed to be in Yokohama, please come seek me out after the session and we'll try and figure out why you are in Yokohama. My co-chair, Chris, unfortunately, I think he got COVID, so he's a bit under the weather. But we'll send him our virtual best. While you're in the room, please wear a mask as per IETF 116 policy. However, if you're speaking at the microphone or taking a sip, you're allowed to take the mask off. There is a note well. The note well describes your privileges, rights, and the expectations that we have of each other in communicating with each other. The slides are also available for download on the following URLs, including the chair slides that contain the note well. You can subscribe to our mailing list. There's a Zulip chat room that I should open up on my laptop so I can monitor it. And there's a collaborative tool to take notes. And with that, I want to ask if anyone wants to volunteer to take notes of this session. If nobody volunteers, I'll have to assign someone. Ben Madison, I thank you for your services. That's a hard no. All right. Peter, you want to take notes? Peter Schoenmaker, thank you so much for your volunteer services. When you entered this room, there was a QR code. There also is the same QR code on the left side screen. Please take a picture and log in with your data tracker URL. And this helps us size the rooms the next time we have this meeting. Minute taker was taken care of by Peter. Thank you, Peter. I'll monitor the Zulip chat room. And then we go on to the agenda. Our agenda today focuses on BMP. So I expect we'll hear the acronym every 30 seconds. First up, we have Paolo Lucenti with an update on TLV and EBIT. Camillo will share updates on the BMP Yang model and BMP path marking. And then finally, Pierre will talk about BMP lock peer. Are there any additional agenda items that we should consider this meeting? Seeing none, hearing none, this is our agenda. Thank you. And we're not yet finished. Let me open up the next one. Paulo, would you mind coming to the stage and entering the spotlight? I don't think there is a clicker, so if you wave your hand or tell me to go to the next slide, that's what I'll do for you.
Sure. And this is working?
It was working.
Yeah.
Testing. Yep. You just gotta put it like in your mouth.
Okay. So yeah, I'm Paolo. Next slide, please. So there are these two drafts, the TLV and the EBIT. Just as a quick recap, this slide I presented already 10,000 times. The TLV draft is about making the protocol extensible because not every message can be extended with the TLVs. Just certain messages, but the peer down and very importantly, the route monitoring do not in the original design of BMP. And so this is what this draft contributes. Next slide, please. So what happened since the draft, we are now version 12. instead of version 10, where we were in the IETF 115. We added an example because things got a little bit, let's say, complicated. So it was good and to have an example. Thanks to Luke Hendricks for having contributed that. Processed all feedback, so there is at the moment no outstanding feedback. But next slide, please. There are at least a couple of important decisions to take, right? So first one was already taken, and essentially we moved the route monitoring to be kind of a copy of the route mirroring message. So we put the BGP message into a PDU. Why we did that? For two reasons. The original one is that there was a kind of criticism to the fact that in the TLVs that are following the BGP message, there could be things that are useful in order to parse the BGP message, or that you maybe want before the BGP message. And so, the fact that, the BGP message had to be the first thing in the message because it was per peer header, then the BGP message, and then the TLVs, was felt a little bit cumbersome. And so following that, let's say we moved the BGP PDU into a TLV, which is exactly what happens in the route mirroring message, right? So we are being consistent. We can say that we are not inventing a new protocol. We are not inventing a new solution. We are just copying a solution that works, and we are, adapting it to the route monitoring message. But there are two more items that require attention. So one is that the draft introduces something called the stateless parsing TLVs, which would be something to help out to parse the BGP message without having to go back to the peer app. For example, if you have add path in the BGP message, either you know it from the peer app message, or at the moment you cannot do anything, right? You don't have a flag. So what happened there is that people said like, oh, I don't like to have this kind of stateless parsing stuff into a TLV. The right place to put them is in the flags, right, as part of the peer flags. And I totally agree with that. We have already useful information there. The only real thing that is missing there is the add path. So I think that what should happen in the next revision of the document, unless somebody really likes this solution, is to remove these TLVs from this draft and maybe have another draft where we simply define the add path flag in the peer header, per peer header. And then there is a second item, which is maybe a little bit the more tricky. So I'm looking also at the chair here. To have an opinion on this, right? So at the moment, what happens is that we define as part of this draft, we bump the version to version 4. Why? Because essentially, like what we are doing in this draft is not backward compatible, because you can have TLVs and a defensive collector may reject a route monitoring message because it expects that there are no TLVs, okay? So there have been always two paths forward for this, right? So one is that you make a new message type, I don't know, extended route monitoring message, or you just maintain, you do this work as part of the route monitoring message and you bump the version to version 4. So the draft is going in this direction, and I like it. There is not enough text. It's only written in the draft that this is what we are doing. Maybe some text could be added, like, that bumping the version, then you have only one copy of the truth, right? So it's not that you say, oh yeah, I support the route monitoring message, but not the extended route monitoring message. And this is it's maybe a simple draft, but it's key in making the protocol extensible and on par with other telemetry protocols, right? So I defended this choice, but in the end, for me, I mean, if people like in a different way, we could go. So at the moment, it's just I received feedback of some people that like to go it in the other direction. Does the chair have an opinion on that, a strong opinion on that, or how do we handle this?
You can always wake me up for an opinion on anything. I think this is a matter of the author's understanding that there is a cost associated with bumping a version number. So to what degree do you want to keep version-free messages around? And I think it will be up to your understanding of how is the ecosystem shaped. Are the other implementations you are aware of fine with bumping the version? Do they have plans to incorporate support for that? And if yes, then there is consensus to bump the version.
Mm-hmm.
If one of them indicated we don't have a particular interest in supporting version 4, then a fork in the road towards a new message type might make more sense. So I'm relying on you as authors indicating to me and to the group, this is what the implementers that are working in this space feel comfortable with.
Right.
And I think by now you know all BMP implementers personally.
Sure. Exactly. Yeah, and what I can say is that, for example, FRR is already implementing BMP version 4, so it's implementing this draft, and I know out of at least one vendor, which is of course my let's say, author in this draft, which is also implementing it. So, and the others, they are not quite there yet, but you know, I got some, you know, why don't we go there in that other direction, but without sound support of why we don't want to bump the version. It's just felt that it's too of a big step. That's the only, let's say, argument I heard for this kind of draft. And you would only bump a version in a BIS draft or something like that, which I disagree, because it's just, you can bump the version as, I mean, it's as free as printing money, right? So it's, in the end, there was no solid thinking in the other direction, you see?
Right. So you mentioned FRR, your co-authors.
Yes.
I think there's another 3 or 4 implementations.
Yes.
Any word from them?
No.
Well, to settle the matter, we could run a survey on the mailing list and at least have public documentation that a number of people spoke in favor or objected to bumping versions versus doing new message type.
Right. Can we also, I don't know, do something like raising hand who did read the draft, and if there is enough people, maybe ask if anybody has opinion in one direction or the other, or not really?
We can absolutely do that. There's even people standing up.
Oh, okay.
Hello, Robert Raszuk. I have a question actually to your AdPath node. So AdPath is not really property of the peer. It's property of the address family and the peer.
Sure.
So you cannot just mark blindly per peer, right?
Yeah.
Flag.
Yeah. Sure. Good. So that brings it back. No, it's true. It's true.
So, is there anyone in the room who implemented version 3 and has a preference to bump or go for a new message type? All right, then we bring it to the mailing list.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Fantastic.
I'll make a to-do item of that.
Fantastic.
Next slide, I assume?
Yes.
There we go.
Okay. So this is about the EBIT draft. So next slide, please.
You gotta talk into the microphone.
Yes.
Oh, you can just hold it in your hand.
Yeah. I can also remove the mask, maybe.
Yes. Yeah. Good. You're allowed to do that.
Okay. So I can be closer.
Yep.
Please, next draft. Same draft. Next slide. So yeah, what happened to the EBIT draft since the last time is that just feedback was processed, and then if we go to the next slide, which is the only one really interesting, is the open items. So in the version number 1, which is the one that I put together before coming to, here. So one step back, we were reported that 65,531-4 were allocated by IANA for experimental use as TLV types, okay? And so this is conflicting with the EBIT draft. As an interim solution, just to let's say cover to register that this feedback was processed. I just in the version 1 of the draft, I just said that we have the EBIT draft, but we still honor these allocations, right? My feeling is that the EBIT draft is exactly for experimental use, to allow people to experiment with stuff so that you have your own private enterprise code. So I think that these allocations from IANA should be removed. I mean, we should just say that this is the EBIT is implementing the new way to experiment with stuff, and we don't need those allocation there. So, and since it was, I was very much in rush, I wanted first, to say this is my plan for the next draft, and it's the only, let's say, major action to wrap this one up. And then there is the second item. It's a forever standing item, open, which I am still questioning, like we are speaking about TLV types with the EBIT. But shall we also apply this also to the stats message? So the stats type have their, the EBIT as well. If a vendor wants to implement some statistics that are, are not standardized and things like that. So that's the thing. If anybody has a feedback on the stats type, I mean, it's very much welcome. Otherwise, I think we will also incorporate this in the next version of the draft and at least call this one draft done. That's it. That's it from me. Feedback, questions, tomatoes. Tomatoes?
No, David Lamparter. So we do already implement a vendor-specific stats type, and I think using the EBIT for that would be preferable. I don't think you can remove this from the IANA registry because there's still going to be old code around that still generates those.
Yeah.
So just change them in the IANA registry to say reserved may have previously been used for experiment, like whatever.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, on that note, version 2 of EBIT is the most recently published one.
Is it? I don't remember. Is it version 1 or 2? No, I think it's a BMP, the IETF BMP EBIT 01, I think. But
Draft IETF GROW BMP TLV EBIT 02.
02. Okay, cool.
And it says, this document makes no changes to the IANA registries.
Yes.
So you would need to update that either, as David suggested, reserved or describe that that portion of the registry should be removed.
Fantastic. Yeah.
But you need to write it down.
Yeah. No. It's a work for future. That's why we now have the interim solution where we say that we still honor that. So yes, I will update that section. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paolo. Next up, Camilo. You want to start with Yang or the other one? Yang. Let's do Yang. Just give me a sign when you want me to go to the next slide.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. Hello.
Perfect.
So this is an update on the difference, well, on the update on the BMP YAN module. Next, please. We have a repository. If anybody wants to visit, you can open issues there or go for the mailing list. How should we do this? I guess issues are fine for editorial and stuff like that, and mailing list should be good, should be the proper way for the big things. Or I do not know. I do not know how you handle it when you have a repo
I think this is an ongoing experiment in the IETF, how to integrate GitHub in the workflows of working groups. If I reflect on my own experience, with some offers, the chosen method is to open issues and then resolve those through pull requests. Other times the issues are done via email within the offer list. But I think it's good to have checkpoints where you report back to the working group, which can be either as you are doing right now in the presentation, or a summary, say once a month, like, hey, we had these 5 issues, link to the issues, and a brief summary of what was resolved.
I hope we have many issues, so go there and open issues there. Next, please. So a couple of changes from the last version, mostly editorial for the draft, and we updated an example there, for in the draft itself, and for the model, tons of editorial changes. We have to remove the IDTY from the identity names, so we did that. Reorganized containers. The draft, the model does reference network instances, the ones on the VRFs, let's say directly by name, but the global network instance, we didn't have a way of referencing that one, so we added an identifier. And we remove peers and address family references because they were references the global routing instance, the global network instance, and that made no sense for the model. Feature-wise, the authors are, let's say, happy to the features the model covers. Of course, if you have any more features you want the model to cover, please come to us. If you have a crazy idea of a TLB that maybe we can configure on the model, then maybe to bring it to us so we can see if it fits the model right now. So now, basically, what we want to see is that the model is actually a right model for the design we want, for the features we want. So what we're going to do in the next release, or in a couple of releases, will be to fill the draft with more details, with a clear explanation of what we want, and with more examples, so that even people that are not familiar with BMP can come and can mention and can give opinions on for instance, on how we model stuff. So that's what we're going to do next. There's already a draft of that document in the repository. It's marked down, but I mean, it is there if you want to see it. Next, please. Just a couple of examples. I'm sorry about the XML. So here is basically a very simple configuration of the connectivity of a monitoring station. I mean, nothing crazy here. Next one, please. BMP covers both active and passive, so I mean, you have the choice of configuring both in the model. If you ask me, I will just do an active, but I mean, we are going to cover what the RFC has. They are behind a choice. Because of that, there's a bit of limitations on how much we can restrain the values. But we'll see what we do about that if we explained what every implementation should do, or if we try to cover that with the model itself. Also, nothing crazy here, right? Network, in this case, we're connecting to the monitoring station through a network instance. Next, please. So for the fun examples, which come from the road monitoring test, this is an example of how a simple configuration will be. Let's say you want everything you want to get everything, all the data from your device, and you have many VRFs, you have crazy stuff in your network. So in the green part there, you can see that identifier means that you want the data for all the network instances. That includes the main one and all your, let's say, specific ones. In the yellow one, you can see how we are asking for, in this case, for the attribute pre. If you wanted the same data for the post or for the local RIP, you will have to repeat these statements. I don't think that's a problem because we don't have that many of them. In the blue side, you can see that we are asking for the IPv4 address family. If you wanted the IPv6, then you will have to repeat it and configure it individually. Again, we don't have that many address families, so I think that's fine. And configurations about that don't change often. And whatever that color is, I think it's orange. You are defining that you want data from all your peers. we were considering whether having an empty peer container will mean all of them, but I think we think that it's better to be implicit about it. So here you're being implicit that you want from all types of peers. Okay, next one, please. This one we didn't go deeper into configuration because it's hard to fit it in the screen. But what happens, this will be like a more complex case. Let's say you have the same scenario, you have a lot of BRFs, you have lots of services in your network, and you want a different configuration for BMP for both, for each network instance. So how you achieve that in the model? Here in blue, you see kind of a default configuration that you apply to all network instances that do not have a specific configuration. So in the green one, we are providing, of course, imagine the configuration. You are providing a specific configuration for the global network one. And let's say you have a monitoring network instance that you don't want to get BMP data from. So here you are disabling it. This is more or less how the model works. And we can discuss whether that's the best way or not in future discussions. That's it. Next one, please. Well, questions and comments? So to finish.
Any questions for Camilo on the topic of BMP Yang models? All right.
Okay, fantastic. So
then we go to path marking.
yes. Path marking, yep. Next one, please. Changing topics. Now it's not Yang anymore. So path marking is a TLB that basically can convey the status of a path. So whether the path is installed, whether it was rejected, whether it's a backup, and stuff like that. There's a reason field on it, so you can say stuff like, "Oh, it was rejected because I don't know, something crazy. It was RPKI invalid, or anything your imagination comes." It is optional. It is also the source of many complications, but we think that it can be useful, so we are going to keep it for there. It depends heavily on the EBIT option, and so even though Paolo mentioned something that like the EBIT is experimental, I don't agree. I think that many times manufacturers have reasons or code that is hard to justify or to standardize, and they keep it like weight. I mean, the weight is something that everybody knows, but it's not standardized in the IETF, so maybe it will remain in EBIT forever, even though everybody knows it. So yeah. Next one, please. What are the differences between before of the latest draft? We pruned a bit the reasons code, and we did it because I have come here a few times saying that maybe we were not going to standardize the reasons codes or the status codes, but we changed our minds and we're going to standardize at least the basic ones because that's what adds value to the TLB. I mean, so we're going to do that and we're going to fight that battle. So next one, please. So the TLB and the EBIT are still under work. I do not know whether it makes sense to wait for that work to settle down and be ready, or Pierre is making faces that he wants to call for adoption right now, and he is a father figure, so at least I will do what he says. So yeah, we probably want call for adoption for this job. I don't know if this makes it official or if you want an email.
I will send an email to start that process. I myself have a question. Why is the reason code only 2 octets? Because if I offer a routing policy, just off the top of my head, for a standard eBHP session, I would go through, are there bogon ASNs anywhere in the AS path? Is the IP space bogon IP space? Is it RPKI invalid? Is it outside the allow list of the operator? And it is, I think, if you look at an eBHP configuration for a transit provider, there are easily 10, 20 reasons or 10, 20 exit points that result in a reject in the policy. So 64 seems very close to 20.
Yeah, but reason codes are not bit individual. You give. So we have two octets, 64,000 options in the reason code. The status code are the ones that are per bit. That are marked per bit. The reasons code are I don't know what the term is. I mean, every one is a number, is a different reason.
Right. So you're arguing.
So for reasons code, we have 64. I don't have the math in my head. Like we have thousands of options. For the status code, we do have only.
Maybe I'm a little bit confused by the SKR because path status is 4 octets, reason code is 2 octets, but the thing is 32 bits wide. Anyway, I think my comment is let's make sure there is
that we have a space for everything.
Ample of room. So to give operators a lot of freedom in being very expressive about why something is rejected.
Yeah. Perfect.
And it's worth exploring that further. I should stop monologuing, Ben.
I think so too. Ben from Work Online. So my use case for this is exactly the one that Job's just articulated, is to kind of like approximate instrumentation for execution of routing policies, especially in tests. And in addition to the making sure that the field is wide enough, it would actually be really quite useful to have some hierarchy so that I had not just a way of encoding each exit point, which might be what I'd be stuck with initially, but in principle, at least, I'd like to be able to have some sort of trace of the path through the routing policy that resulted in that exit point. Whether or not I've got any vendors that I can actually get that working with is a different thing, but I'd at least in principle like the protocol to support it so that I can work with the vendors to make the policy execution work.
Yeah, man. So there was this other draft around that was basically championed by Yunnan, which was the route policy one, which was, I mean, added that complexity of the hierarchy and all of that. We always thought the two were kind of complementary. I mean, this was like let's say a cheaper way of covering, like, let's say cheaper use cases in which you just wanted like a simple reason. Well, this was RPKI invalid, and that's it. For instance, instead of giving the trace back of all the points, we might keep this one simple just for that. But I mean, if you're interested in the, I wasn't an author of the other draft, but I think somebody here, I mean, Thomas is here. I think it was an author with Paolo. I guess you can discuss about that, and whether to have the two drafts or to join any one. I'm okay with it.
So I think other than in that respect, they were essentially the same idea. I certainly don't think that just that distinction justifies two different versions of it knocking around. I kind of feel like that level of extensibility is pretty cheap. There's, just because the hierarchy exists to be capitalized on doesn't mean that you have to use more than one layer of it.
Right. Well, if you ask me about that, I will. If you ask me here, I would say we can remove the reasons code from this one and just keep the status, which is a very cheap way of saying, for instance, like a path was filtered or not. I mean, it's just, and then maybe the reasons we have them in a proper way, complex way in another TLB. But I mean, this is just what comes with my head,
sure.
Right?
Yeah, that could potentially work. I don't know. Without that mechanism baked in, I'm not sure how useful this ends up being as a standalone thing, though. I think, I know the path was dropped, right? It's not in the BGP table. I know it went away. That I think just the status code is probably not that interesting without some expression of the reason why.
Yeah, you think? Yeah, well, for the use cases that I have in mind, at least at work, I basically just need the status. I mean, knowing that a path it's a backup, knowing that it was filtered so somebody can check and why. And it is true that the reason can always be helpful, right? It's just that the complexity I mean, it adds complexity, and it's something that we have been battling with this draft, is that basically every complexity comes from the reasons code being added.
Totally.
But yeah, no, I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah, so I mean, the key for me is that at the moment we've got a whole bunch of integration tests that that try and cover as much of our routing policy as possible, but our routing policy is super complex, and trying to reason about whether or not you've exercised every path through the policy is incredibly
Yeah, you're trying
hard
a coverage test, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Measuring the coverage.
It's coverage tooling that I'm trying to achieve. The question of whether or not a thing got filtered or whether it's been installed on as a backup path.
No.
That's easy to do with what exists today.
I see your point. Perfect. Now we can discuss all of it.
Paolo Lucente, NTT. Just a comment to both Ben and you, Camillo, that it's true that the path tracing draft is not active anymore, and it was very complex. I myself had to implement it in a collector, and it was very complex. But let's remind ourselves that now we have this REL draft, the one that was presented at IETF115, and Camillo is also a co-author, which would like to cover a lot of these, use cases. And we are with Camillo, we are REL, root event logging. Yeah, and with Camillo, we are looking for inputs and where to take the draft and things like that. I think that draft has a very good and sound idea underlying, but use cases, things that we want to do, and things like that, especially with policies and things like that, we should go in that direction. So if you have inputs, I mean, it would be awesome. Thank you.
David Lamparter, also commenting on the previous two. So there's a very fine distinction here between an actual trace and then hierarchical refinement of what the reason for the filtering is. A trace I will absolutely not be able to give you because that's just way too costly. But I absolutely think we should have a hierarchical status kind of thing that just starts with was rejected by route map, and then it gets more precise about the specific event that caused the rejection. Maybe it could even go as far as the last step being an actual string of telling you what happened, but that would be the extreme of this. The simpler form is just like category and then this kind of more specific thing, and yeah.
Yeah, David's quite right. I think what I'm asking for is more correctly an error chain than a trace bag.
So in summary, all of us want to be able to correlate the integer in the message to a place in the routing policy. The exit point of the routing policy. Well, I sent a call for working group adoption. So if you want it to be, that we continue to work on this as a working group, express your support and contribute text. Rudiger.
For choosing, kind of trying to really code automatically the trace through the policy. Not sure how happy our implementers would be about that request. To me, I remember my asks for getting a drop reason code into the essentially stored rib-in if it's stored. And my suggestion for that could be applied here as well. And that suggestion was, well, okay, allow in the configuration languages on the drop statement an optional integer that is defined by the people who are doing the policy. And, well, okay, that gets rid of asking Jeff and his friends to do complex coding. I think that could be applied here as well.
No, Ben, you're not at the microphone. Get in line. Jeff, please.
Jeff Haas, and with apologies, I walked in the room after you finished the presentation, but I think I know what you're talking about. We've talked about this before. There are three things going on here that are messy. One of them effectively is one that Rudiger just slightly touched on, which is once you figure out where something has failed in the system, you've rejected things in the policy, if you want it to actually show up somewhere, you have two choices. Spit it out immediately and not hold on to it, or hold it as state. And implementations that are memory sensitive don't want to hold on to something that's expensive state-wise. So minimally, you're looking at burning some set of system resources just to track something that is effectively a piece of ephemeral data. This is one of the things that makes it painful. The stack trace type thing is problematic for people's policy engines because depending on how it's going, most things are implemented basically as, simple procedural state machine passes through an if-then chain, context-free grammar, blah, blah, blah. None of these things are terribly exciting from an implementer standpoint, but what you're effectively looking is, if you want to get a GDB style stack trace, you have to maintain the stack. That can be added to, I think, probably to most people's policy engines without too much problem. But once you have that sort of thing, the item 3, once you've annotated and have the thing that's to keep, is how do you represent it in a fashion that is actually useful? Because if I tell you that you've gotten in your import clause into the third set of things in the chain that is now 7 terms down, that is failing to match the prefix list and it's taking a reject action, sure, I could have an entire stack trace of this, but do you want basically a internet route's worth of rejects worth of stack traces eating your memory and your writ? The answer is probably not. So these things are all doable, but they're costly. What I'd actually suggest instead is that it's actually far more productive to just simply note that something is rejected, have simple scalar reasons, as have been discussed, a registry of things that are the common motivations of why something has failed, and some of these can be system local catalogs. You just have to figure out a way to exchange the catalog. That's still state you're going to burn to hold on to this, but you could at least make the choice as an implementer, you do this or not. But the second piece of this is that the implementations that are capable of producing this type of information, it'd be nice to have some way, maybe through a netconf operation to say, test policy, this exact route, and let it give you an ephemeral stack return rather than have it maintain the state for it.
So my day one wish list for how this would work in practice, it's state that. So these are tests that run kind of not in the production network, but I would obviously like the environment in which they operate to be as similar to the production network as possible. So I wouldn't want some massive code path to be activated only at test time. So I think my happy medium for this would be roughly what Rudiger described, but in addition to a kind of a scalar value at final action time, a scalar for every kind of policy fall through. So like a route map continue statement also has an integer, and then I can use that as my trace through the policy.
Mm-hmm. And Ben, you're a bright cookie. I suspect if you thought about how many bits it would take to actually represent the state that you're looking for, you're going to find that your scalar is actually a very, very big bit string.
That's okay, because then I can hang on to it in my tests and not in my not in the production network.
You don't want it in your rib. And part of the problem we're discussing here, this is, I'm suspecting, BMP. If you're going to actually do this, it has to be held on to minimally until the thing's been emitted in BMP. So, this is a overhead that you're taking, and back pressure for serving the stuff can cause this memory to stack up.
Yeah. No, I completely. That would be a question of tuning where I apply those traces. The nightmare scenario for us is we have some very effective kind of second tier filter that's catching everything, and we think that it's being caught further up the chain, and it's not.
Yep.
I want to know that enough that I'm willing to throw quite a lot of memory at it.
I hear that, and then I hear other people is like, I can't afford, to throw a byte at something.
You can all see why I think the reason code is the most complex part of this TLV.
Rüdiger Volk again. Kind of really aside from BMP, but for Ben, your testing stuff. Are you aware that at least at some point in time, major router vendors actually implemented oh goodness, what's the name? Actually implemented instrumentation for the policy evaluation that could be turned on optionally, and that actually allowed statistics like this clause has been actually visited. And maybe how much time it took to evaluate something where, say, interesting regex are evaluated, and the time that takes gets interesting. Using that kind of instrumentation, if it is still around, could be used for some of your tests.
Okay, we shall continue this conversation on the mailing list, but it is good to see that people are interested in this topic. So I'm excited. I'm personally excited to see work continue on this. Thank you, Camillo. Then BMP lock rip peer address. Pierre-François? François, ouais.
So hello everyone, I'm Pierre from Inside. I'm going to discuss about this new draft, GROW-BMP lock peer. It's joint work with Maxence, who's implementing BMP lock rib in FRR, and Paolo, who's implementing the collector on the other side. Next slide, please. So I'm going to explain why. It's going to be very quick. The draft is very short. I hope not too controversial. I'm going to really quickly explain why we're doing this, then the two options that we're listing, and then we'll discuss what we're doing with this. So next slide, please. So 1969 provides a view on the lock rib, which is fine, but the peer address field is set to 0. We found it a bit unfortunate because that means that you know which pass was installed, but you don't know who gave you that pass. And the field is there, ready to be used, but it's 1969 says it must be 0. So when you're digging in your data, well, you have to do additional work to know where this pass was coming from, and it's getting a bit messy. And when you're doing multipass scenario, it's get even more difficult because you lose the @pass ID when you have @pass turned on, etc., and it's getting a bit cumbersome. And so in the implementation we've been working on, the information is just right there. It was actually additional work to set the field to 0 because we were reusing code that was having it, right? So we would like to provide this information for those implementations that are okay to provide this to us. So next slide, please. So we have two options. I would like to only keep one, but I will let you guys decide. So we would like to simply allow the peer address to be non-zero field, and so there we would have a backward compatibility issue if we have a paranoid collector that actually checks if this field is set to 0 and complains about it. So the default behavior would be to remain 0 field and through config to enable the fact that we would actually get the peer address on a pass. If you don't like it, then we could also use a TLV and register a new TLV to actually provide this information, so that collectors who would not know about this TLV would just, not do anything with it, and that's it, silently ignore it, and we would not have any issue. Next slide, please. Yeah. So the two options are quite easy. I prefer option one, so the fact of using the peer address field because it's already there, and so it's quite aligned with what we do in Ribbon, in Ribbon and Rebout approaches. So why not? I will let you guys decide. We're okay to implement any of the option. In our current implementation, actually, we are using the option one, but it's not yet committed. So. Another action item we have on the draft is we forgot to book a value flag to say that whether the peer address is v6 or v4, as it's not the same set of flags as the one for Adribbon. So that would be an item on the draft if we actually do this. And I would like to see if there is interest for this, and then make it a working group doc if there is sufficient interest.
Next up, Jeff, I think, was in queue.
Does not add memory, Jeff. No memory.
Of course,
Sorry, I'm answering the question before.
Of course, it has memory. But I think you may have just answered my question. So you were reminding me. So the V bit is redefined in this circumstance.
Yeah, and we are a bit sad with Paolo. It's just a little to the right compared to the other one. That's ugly. We know we have no option, other option than doing that. I'm sorry.
No, that's the reason why I'm standing here, because not speaking of a very specific, extremely large customer was running into some parse problems already due to different bugs on this matter. You're going to find that this VBit thing makes this not a possible feature, for exactly the reasons you're thinking of. Things are already expecting the flags to behave a certain way. So if you were looking to do some use of generic behaviors, probably not necessarily helpful. The loc rib as part of the pure up already sends an optional TLV for the rib name.
Sorry, I did not parse that. Can you?
So as part of the loc rib view being sent initially, it goes into pure up state and sends a message related to that. One of the optional TLVs that go out as part of that is already a rib name. So some people are already expecting this name of the table to be sent as part of the session so they can identify things. It's not part of every message as you're wanting it to be, but at the very least it means that during the pure up message, you could include a local address as a system identifier so that you can then further demultiplex the individual records. So you have a tension here. What you can do is, for free, add an additional TLV for pure up. The station that's receiving must keep track of this as it's part of installing the database. But stations are already having to keep this sort of rolling state per connection anyway. This is already done. Your desire to have it as part of every route monitoring message, you can also add it into each one of those messages as well, but you're mostly adding overhead. So your choice really is, do you impose this overhead each route monitoring message, additional parse load, or do you just do it once during the pure up message?
Well, I want to have it per pass that I receive, right? And we have it there. So it depends on the implementation that you have, but we have it there, right there. And when we create the message, that information, right? And we're consuming the space on the wire because the field is there empty. And all we are saying is, if your implementation can do it at no cost, just enable it and give us this information.
For the case where it's v4, you are correct. For the case where it is IPv6, the vbit is otherwise moved for something else, you would be changing the parser path for this, I believe. I will dig into the RFC to do.
Yeah, let's discuss that offline because I'm not sure we're in sync there.
Thomas Graf, Swisscom. Obviously, this is for a network operator very interesting to understand from which peer this path has been learned from. And just one comment, basically, if it would not be part of the route monitoring message, then basically we are just shifting the problem downwards because we need to correlate the data, and I think it's not an additional overhead on the message itself. Thanks.
Yeah, that's why we're doing this. And yeah, thanks for confirming. There is actually another issue that we have is that without knowing the peer address, you have to actually rewrite the pass ID because you're talking about paths that you received from multiple peers who have their own path ID space for that path. And you'll just lose this information when you do not use the peer address, because you cannot keep it on a per peer space. And so digging after that and try to find your path when your peers are using that path is getting really messy.
Camilo Cardona. Just in case you want to configure something, please consider checking that the BMP YAM model will support it.
Yeah, okay, promised. Good point, Camilo, sorry.
So I was looking at RC 9069, and it doesn't have strong language that the receiver must confirm the field is all zeros. It basically says ignore.
It's zero field.
So that means in the per peer header right now, implementations in the case of IPv6 are sending 16 bytes worth of zeros. In the case of IPv4, 4 bytes. And yeah, that
unfortunate, huh?
So how did this situation come to be?
I'm asking you.
Was there an oversight?
I think that some implementation were a bit struggling getting that information at the place where they're generating the message, and so they got scared and they decided to have it be zero field. That's my guess, right? For us, on our implementation, it was work to actually put it to zero instead of the actual peer. So
it's just a mem set, right?
Paulo,
do
I was
you have any
surprised
historic
myself
context?
because actually it's when we did the testing that we realized that for us it was obvious that we would set the peer address to the peer address. No, I'm asking you how, but maybe you're an author of the RFC.
Yes,
so please tell us.
Paolo Lucente, as a co-author of 9069. Yeah, the context is a little bit what Pierre was describing, like there were vendors maybe struggling with having this information, and so it, let's say, won a little bit the direction that it should be zero field. Actually, the document was kept under GitHub. So if you see one of the commits, there was one commit to the document that never made in a version, I think, with me adding the verbiage that we should have the peer, but then it was removed, it was rolled back because it was, let's say, not possible. So yeah, so I pretty much welcome the work that Pierre is doing, and he's saying like, I am doing this work in FRR, and the thing is just there. It's all, you know, why doing a mem set instead of doing a mem copy? So I agree. That was it.
Jeff, final comments?
I found reference if you care.
Sorry?
Sorry. I found the reference that I was talking about. So the pure flags that are used in the same spot for the record type in 7854, first bit is the V bit. This is what I was talking about.
Then you have the F bit, yeah,
F
that
bit.
misaligns it. Yeah.
So yes, if you want to add a different bit, is that your proposal, new bit to say this can be V6 field? So you're moving the V bit into something else?
Oh, you want me to shift them? I was just wanting to book just to run right after.
Just pick one, yes.
Okay, we'll do that.
Okay, there we go.
So next.
There might be a misunderstanding because it doesn't seem new bits need to be added.
Oh, I'm.
Of course, I can be very confused.
Oh no, I'm probably very confused too. So 7854, if you actually want to display the PDU format, the per peer header that goes in with every BMP route monitoring message, includes like, here's the space for the address, which can be a varying amount of size, and the size interpretation depends on the V bit being set or unset in the standard view, and of course. This doesn't matter for locrib because it was originally only just local. So in 90 whatever it is,
9069,
that same bit position, the bits are not equivalent. They're completely different namespace effectively. So, that's the F bit inside of there. You can't reuse that bit. You can define a new bit. This is where you get your backward compatibility issues. You can change the size of things if you want to, but it's not one-for-one comparable. You're not leveraging any new parser code or anything like that. You have to make changes. There must be changes in your parser for the record type. Is this a local rib peer or is this a ribbon peer?
Right. Yes. Yeah.
So these are not hard things.
That should already be the case, no? You're already doing that, no?
You'd be surprised what some people's collectors do that are very strange assumptions from the RFCs.
Okay.
So what you're saying, Jeff, is that some implementers may also ignore the V bit because it's going to be zero filled anyway, and that might cause them to not skip 16 bytes.
The thing is, there's no V bit for local peer. They were using the same flags field, giving it completely distinct meanings depending on whether it's a locrib type or it's pure up. Implementations that are well made pay attention to this difference. But the consequence of this is, it's like you can't use exactly the same parser code. You can't say, look at bit 1, and bit 1 is going to mean V6 or V4. You have to change it depending on the record type for your backward compatibility.
Oh, yep.
It's a very small, stupid detail, but this is what has already tripped up us publicly as a bug. You will find Juniper's implementation changes.
Your implementation is well made, right?
Yeah, we got bit by it because we made a mistake in exactly this case. The person who did the implementation wasn't paying attention that the semantic changed. So
thank you so much for your patience in highlighting
that we screwed up
this issue. So it sounds to me that if you want to fill the fields, you need to take one of the unused bits, preferably one that is unused in both contexts.
Unfortunately, the second piece of the problem is if you're expecting a 9069 type behavior, sure, you could look for this new bit, but the thing that announces in BMP today that you have structural changes is it's a new version number. This would normally be a reason to bump the BMP version.
Which is an argument to go for the TLV route.
Which is an argument to go to TLV, but if you throw it on TLVs work perfectly fine, but you've removed the case of this was just here for free. It's as an optional feature, the part of the discussion case here, and this is back to the collectors, what do they do? If your collector is already knowing from the peer up message who it is talking to at the end of this connection, through NATs as we have discussed before, we know that it has a specific rib that is associated to it, because maybe it's the system's main table, maybe it's a VRF, and we can also log into that field the optional TLV of here's the system's IP address or router ID, or pick all these nice identifiers. The collector, as part of receiving things, has enough state for that session to do the appropriate decoration in your database, which is really what you're asking for. Nobody is going to really be MRT streaming these things to a file in most cases. And even if they were, just like MRT, you would use the information inside of the peer up information to decorate the rest of the state, because it's it's redundant state. It's tied to the session. If you had it for free, sure, use it. But what you're really looking for is not that you have this thing nicely in the TLVs. You care about that the database does the right thing. And as long as it's a pure up, the database can do the right thing.
Paulo.
Yes, Paolo Lucente. I just want to express my preference to, and that is something that was also clear in the BMP TLV draft, where we defined the stateless TLV, stateless parsing TLVs. I am very much in favor of, trying to make BMP as stateless as possible, maintaining states for sure in the collector. I agree with Jeff, like it's not a router, you have all the capabilities and memory and whatever, but we add the complexity, and the complexity is never, it's not just about resources, it's adding code and tracking stuff and whatever. So I would much more be on the stateless part. I agree with the comment that Thomas made before in this sense. And to be honest with you, now I was just very quickly thinking, like, so we have this bit, we have the F bit, which is the first bit in the flags. Okay, we leave it apart, like it has to stay there. And then we have the second one, it's unused. So let's say if that value is 0, and anyway, it's the peer address, it's the size of a v4, and it's all zeros. So if you just don't support this new feature, it's okay. As a collector. If you do support it, but the exporter is not supporting it, I mean, you will just read something that is all zeros.
Mhm.
And if it's a 1 and you as a collector support it, then there should be a v6. So I don't know. I don't see the big problem. So I would just wanted to say that.
I think you're right that the problem is surmountable, but I think Jeff was spot on that it's not just filling in the zeros, but a bit needs to indicate the length of what follows. But it will be fun. So we have the V bit in position 1 in RFC 7854 in.
It will be in position 2.
And
Sorry.
in the update to 9069, it will be in position 2. And maybe in future work you can try position 3. So yes.
You said update to. Does this need to be an update to 9069? Yes.
Yeah, because
Okay.
9069 says it's going to be zeros, and you say it's
Okay, we'll
not
do
going to
it
be
as it is.
zeros. So
Fine.
yes, you need to update that.
Can I have a sense from the room whether we should actually do this or not?
Are people? Is there a show of hands for people's interest in continuing this work? All right.
Are people against? Sorry, I'm interested. I would like to know whether. Oh,
So I suggest take the feedback. So the recordings of the session are on YouTube if you want to rewatch the conversations we had just now. Incorporate the feedback. Try to make a decision if you want to go for TLV or bit. Update your individual document and also make the document update 9069. Upload it, and then we can consider working group adoption.
sure, great.
So yeah, do one more revision round, and then we can consider with the group to continue or not.
Perfect. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Prompt recovery to Chris.
This was the last presentation of the GROW session at IETF116. This means I'm going to give you 21 minutes back. Thank you so much for attending. Peter, thank you for taking minutes. If you can email them to me, that would be much appreciated. And I will see, hopefully, all of you at IETF117 in the beautiful city of San Francisco. Thank you all, and have a good day.